Hello, I'm Tom Rogers and this is the Rebel Education Podcast. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Rebel Education Podcast with me, Tom Rogers. I've decided to go out and about to record the intro to this podcast. I'm currently stood down on the shore at Blackpool where I'm living at the moment, just staring out at the ocean. The beach is relatively empty. Few people dotted around, but it's obviously in the middle of lockdown, so there's not a lot happening. The weather's okay, and I've just thought I'd come out for my bit of exercise for the day and to introduce this podcast. And I'm delighted to be republishing some of my school leader interviews that I conducted last year with several school leaders across the UK. And one of those school leaders was Sonia Thompson. Sonia is the head teacher of St Matthew's Primary School in Birmingham, which is a Church of England primary school. And I came across Sonia through Twitter. I came across a few things she'd said actually at a Research Ed event, which I was really intrigued by and really interested in. So I started following her a bit more on Twitter and really liked a lot of the stuff that she was said. And the biggest thing that came through her Twitter account was her integrity and her commitment to the community that she's a part of over in Birmingham. And that was confirmed when I went to visit her, because the school is a genuine community school. If you visit the school website, it is you can see straight away that the main focus is the students, the community. It's not about much else. It's about that. And it was fantastic to visit the school. And walking up to the school, it's in the middle of a kind of a housing estate, quite a large housing estate or large suburban area in central Birmingham. It's about a 30-minute walk out of the city centre. And when I met Sonia, I could tell straight off the bat how committed she was. And I think any head teacher that works in a school, that stays in a school, I think you're going to hear in the interview how long Sonia has been working at the school, but it's a long time. And I think anybody who commits in that way to one school community, it's really special. It's really special, not only for the entire teaching profession, but for the students in that school, because that is a face that they have seen, that they have that they know is committed in that really special way to them as a community, to them as individuals, to getting to know them and building relationships with them. And I just think that's incredibly special. And I've come across teachers and leaders in my career who've been in a school for 10, 20, 30 years, and it's incredible, that relationship that they build over that period of time. So this is a rerun of the interview. I hope you enjoy it, and I'll check back in at the end of the interview, and we can hopefully reflect on the amazing things that Sonia is doing down there in Birmingham. So enjoy the interview.
Hi everybody, and welcome to episode 8 of my school leader interview series. I'm here with Sonia Thompson, who's the head teacher of St Matthew's Church of England Primary School in Birmingham. Sonia, say hello to everybody.
Hi everyone. Gosh.
Yeah.
Great to be interviewed by Tom. Nice to meet you as well.
Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you, Sonia. So we're gonna go through, as I've done in my previous interviews that we've done. To start with, I've got about 10 quick fire questions, and then we're going to go into more detail in terms of leadership management, wider education discussion, and so on from there. So first things first, Sonia, what's the first thing that you grab in the morning?
Probably my glasses.
Glasses.
I cannot see without glasses.
Yeah.
So I've just got to search around for them and grab them. So that's the first thing.
Gotta get the glasses.
Gotta get the glasses on.
And who is your biggest inspiration in life, would you say?
I'd probably say my parents. I know that they're sort of both of them, I'd say. They came to England, didn't have anything, came from Jamaica.
Yeah.
They had 10 children, I'm one of 10. And they did a great job of raising us, giving us some good values, and I think showing us that actually helping others, supporting others, particularly my mum, helping, supporting, making sure that people know that they're not alone. Lots of phone calls, that's mum's great at that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think my parents are probably
Parents.
the greatest,
Yeah,
strongest influence.
Okay. And what do you think it is that people notice about you as a person or as a leader or whatever the domain?
Probably the glasses again. The other thing is the shoes. I love shoes.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds very superficial, but
Yeah.
people do notice. I've got a particular pair of half leopard print, half black.
Yeah.
When I wear those shoes, they get a lot of attention.
Yeah.
So yeah, shoes.
Everyone's like, there's the head
Yeah,
teacher. Yeah.
with the shoes.
There you go.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, in terms of what people notice about me, one of your students, didn't they, on the way in,
Yes,
noticed
yes.
I had quite a funny exchange on the way
Yes.
into Sonia's school, because one of the students actually pointed at me and gazed at me and said, "Prince Harry." I'm not Prince Harry, but I understand, you know, where that came from, ginger hair, etc.
I'm taking from that my students are watching.
There you go, current affairs.
They're covered today and they know what's going on in the world.
It was quite amusing.
Yeah.
What do you hope? Because obviously you probably wouldn't hope that people would just recognise your shoes.
Yeah.
So what is it that you hope people will notice about you?
That I'm passionate about what I do. That the reason why I work in schools in areas of high deprivation, because that's really where I've done most of my teaching, is because I want to make a difference. I want children to do well. The thing that really motivates me is the fact that I recognise that not all children will get to the exact place that we want them to get to, but I do want my children to have choices.
Yeah.
And to not be limited because they've been born in a certain area.
Yeah.
This is probably one of the most deprived areas in Birmingham, in Britain actually. And I just feel that shouldn't be a barrier. We've got fabulous children in the school. We've got wonderful parents who really want their children to do well. And as I said, the thing that I want people to know is that I'm here not just because it's a job, but because it's a passion and I want to make a difference for the children.
And how long have you been head teacher here for?
Actually, I've only been the head since September.
Oh, okay, so it's a new role.
But
Okay.
I've been at the school. This is probably my 7th or 8th year.
7th or 8th,
I've lost
yeah.
count, but
Yeah.
yes, I was the deputy before.
You were the deputy, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm kind of wedded to this.
Yeah, I was going to say, do you feel this is part of your
Yes, I do.
identity and
Definitely, we've come a long way.
yeah.
Gone through lots of ups and downs, but we've been focused on, as I said, getting those outcomes for the children and making sure that parents are engaged and teachers have got what they need in order to do a good job, job that they, as good a job as they can do.
As they can do.
With the barriers and
Yeah.
sometimes the issues that we have. But as I always say, we can't move our school. We've got to embrace everything that comes with being in an area like this, and we've got to make it work.
Yeah,
Got
true.
to make it work.
True. What do you think is your biggest weakness or fatal flaw? What's your...
Knowing when to stop. I'm a bit of a 20, and I'm not a good role model for the teachers.
Yeah.
I'm a bit of
You
a
even fit in an interview with Tom Rogers, you know.
Yeah, yes.
On a Friday afternoon.
On a Friday
Yeah.
afternoon. So yeah, I'm a bit of a 24/7 person, which is not good. I'm not advocating it. I
Yeah.
think you need to wind down.
Does that show you enjoy it though? Is that
Yes.
part of your... It's almost not a hobby, but it's
Yeah.
part of...
It's part of what I do.
Yeah.
I do outside things because I'm very much somebody who goes to church.
Yeah.
I'm the secretary treasurer there.
Really?
So, yes. So
As well?
Yes, oh gosh, yes. I also sing at my church. So
I should have put an interview question about singing.
No, don't. So I do go and help with making sure that our finances are all sorted. So, you know, I do make sure, and that for me is my wind down time. That's what I do. That's what I'm passionate about.
Yeah.
And as I said, the other thing that I love is children's books. I'm always making time to read children's books. So yeah, I've got other things that I do that help me to kind of relax.
But your biggest weakness is switching off.
Yeah,
and
switching off from
disconnecting.
school.
Yeah. I'm sure many will share that
Yes,
one.
yes.
What is your biggest strength then, if that's your biggest weakness?
I'd like to think that I'm a good role model in terms of the way that prior to becoming a head, the way that I led my subject areas, the way that I supported class teachers and enabled them, hopefully, to do a better job. Prior to coming to St Matthews, I was an English consultant for the local authority. So again, I'd like to think that I was able to offer some good support, some sound support. And again, as a deputy, we're also a teaching school, so we do support other schools.
Yeah.
And again, I'd like to think that people would say that Sonia really tries her best to make sure that the support that she gives is sensible and helpful and actually does make a difference.
Is there anything you would avoid when it comes to supporting somebody? Is there anything you would steer away from?
Not necessarily steer away from, but I am very passionate about ensuring that the school's able to continue with what I do. I think you've got to make sure that if you are supporting the school, they're in the right place to receive that support. And often schools want to take more things on board, and actually it does require leadership to say actually we can't. And that can be difficult, particularly if you're in a position where your school's facing particular issues. It's hard to say actually we need to just stop.
We need to stop.
And think about what we're doing.
That makes sense. And what's the one personality trait that you simply don't have any time for?
Gosh, I think I'm quite tolerant. I think I quite accept everybody, every trait really. Can't think of one.
Oh, come on. It's got to be one.
I think I'm a very calm person.
Yeah.
And it takes a lot to rile me. Twitter's a place that can be difficult. Sometimes you've got to pull back, sometimes you've got to push forward, but there's a couple of personality traits on there that I do find challenging.
You find difficult?
Yeah, but I was reminded just yesterday by my assistant head, Sonia, just remember, Twitter is just a place and you can walk away from. So I said to myself, thank you for that, reminding me. So yeah.
It is.
Because it is a little bit addictive. In a strange kind of way.
I think having an occasional Twitter break's a good thing.
I think it is good.
I have an occasional, like I had one over Christmas for 6 days where I just completely shut everything down.
Yeah.
But if you don't do that, then maybe you could get on top of you. But I don't know.
To be fair, I'm a scroller.
Yeah, you're a lurker.
I kind of tweet about books and things that are happening in school.
Yeah.
Try not to get involved too deeply.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's an interesting place. I'm definitely a lurker.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. And would it be for you comfortable silences or non-stop conversation?
I'm happy with both, but it depends on who you're with. I think some people you can be with some people and actually a comfortable silence is what it is.
Yeah.
All right, but you can be with others and I've got to think of something.
Yeah.
So it just depends who you're with. I'm a bit of both.
Yeah. Okay.
I can do a comfortable silence, but I can also get quite, got to say something. So
Yeah.
depends on
And what do you think's better, being nice or being fair?
I think being fair. You can be fair and you can be nice at the same time.
You can try.
But I think you've got to be fair as much as you can.
Yeah.
Being nice is great, of course you can be nice, but I think fairness is important.
Yeah. Okay. moving on a little bit now into more about maybe teaching or leadership. What as a teacher or leader, what's the most embarrassing thing that's happened to you in the classroom or in school?
Falling down in front of the children.
Falling over.
Falling over. Walking through the hall, and this is where the shoes are an issue sometimes. So I had the heels on and I actually just fell flat on my face.
On your face, front?
Yeah, front. And the children were sitting there and they were fantastic because they all ran over, tried to help me. They were laughing, Tom.
I'm a compassionate leader.
Yes, and they helped me up, and they were really great.
The children helped
you up? The children helped me up, yeah, they were great.
It's touching.
Yes, but very, very embarrassing. Very embarrassing.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And what's the hardest thing, do you think, about being a teacher?
I think teaching is hard. I think because we've got our pupils in front of us every day, we get to know them, we get to like them, most of them.
Yeah.
We want them to do well. It's hard to, it is that switching off thing and stepping back. I think there is an issue around workload. Certainly we've been trying to address, there's a lot that you have to do. But I think it is that the onus is on us as leaders to make as many adjustments as we can for the staff, because it is a lot. We're at the place where we don't necessarily have to ask for planning. We don't necessarily have to do the in-depth type of observations.
Yeah.
But teachers still worry, they're still concerned. So it is
here or in general?
In general, but certainly here as well. They're still concerned about if we do say, oh, we're going to do book scrutiny, why are you doing it, what do you want to see? It's not about you, it's about how supportive we can be in terms of supporting you to move particular children forward, things that you don't need to do, things that you need explained a little bit more. So I think teachers just need that reassurance that actually leaders are always looking for ways of making the job
easier.
It's not going to be easy, but just making it easier.
Yeah.
And as I say, just keeping that high profile, that staff actually we're aware and we want to make it easier.
Got you.
Yeah.
Got you. And what's your, I say, quite a common thing that you see on Twitter or even just talking to teachers is dealing with parents.
Mm-hmm.
So how would it be if a parent came in now and they were angry and they came into your office and they were exasperated? How would you, what advice would you give to another leader who's got to deal with that?
I think what we've tried to build here, and certainly the legacy from the previous head as well, we have got an open door policy here. We're very much about embracing parents as part of their children's learning process. I think when parents understand that actually you want the very best for their children, they can often come in quite angry, but you can diffuse that with being very clear about the reasons for certain things happening, the reasons why teachers have done certain things, often in the child's best interest.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that parents don't back that away and say, actually, I don't want to hear that. But I think since I've been here and the relationship, we actually have every half term a day that we call Parents to School Day, when we invite parents in to just come and sit in the classroom,
Yeah.
to hear what the teachers are doing, to see how their child is reacting, to see how the other children are learning. And I think it's that type of open door thing that just makes parents feel that actually, A, they're willing to listen, they're willing to do something, they are fair, and I think that is that thing about being fair. And they try as hard as they can to get a resolution. It might not be the resolution that the parents are happy with, not all the time, but sometimes we can't. It is something that actually we've had to do, and it's in the child's best interest, and actually parents, you've got to understand that.
Yeah.
But I haven't had a parent that we haven't been able to, that hasn't left the room feeling, actually, I need to leave this school, because they've been able to. And I think that is about the relationship,
Yeah. Okay. And you know, you mentioned that this is your first year as head teacher here, and prior to that deputy. So what's your, if you had to pick a particular element of your vision for this school? So I'm sure the school has plenty of strengths already, but if it was something that you wanted to evolve or change, or some vision that you want to do different or extra, what would it be?
That's an interesting question. One of our vision statements is about courage, attainment and pride. We call it CAP. And it is about children and teachers being really courageous about what we do. In the face of some quite challenging circumstances in an area like this, where parents struggle with housing and domestic violence, being able to jobs, seeing prospects, motivating the children to really want to do their best. And often, as I said, that takes courage for the parents, takes courage for the children. We also talk about our children being very proud of themselves, their parents, their area, because actually it is your area. What can we do as a school that's placed here to support the area? And then it is about helping them to do the best that they can do to get those outcomes. We are driven by getting those outcomes for the children, not for the reasons Ofsted or government, but just, as I said, because we want them to have those choices.
A chance,
we want them to have a chance, and it's not about being dictated to by the area that they live in. Of course there are barriers, but we've got to try and knock those down, we've got to try and overcome them. It sounds very idealistic, but it's certainly my key driver, my key vision is about giving the children choices.
And when hiring a teacher, because presumably you're going to be doing more of this moving forward, what kind of things do you look for in a teacher coming in? Because as you've just described the area and the context, so does that maybe make you look for different qualities or things within the teachers you recruit, or does it make no difference? Would it not matter what school you were the head teacher of now, you'd still look for the same things, or are the things unique here to your context that you might look for?
No, there's nothing unique. I just need somebody who loves teaching, knows that it is hard work, regardless of what we're going to do to make it easier, but also is passionate about children doing well, and that's whatever child it is. And that is, as I said, their driver. They want the children in their classroom to do well. They're going to make every effort to make that happen. With our support. I also do think it's important that teachers are open to learning more. There's so many new things, and of course we've got to filter those new things. I think as a school we've been on a journey in terms of filtering out what works for us in our context, driven by research, but also what doesn't work, and let's move that to one side. So we need people here who are open to those changes. Definitely. And teachers who, as I said, are willing to improve their subject knowledge, because it isn't easy. It's not easy to teach full stop, but in an area like this where children come in 18 months behind.
You think they're 18 months behind when they come in?
Yeah, definitely, in terms of language, in terms of vocabulary. Often nursery provision isn't great. We haven't got a nursery straight into reception here, and often the provision isn't great. We've probably got a great, outstanding nursery, but the other provision isn't necessarily the best in terms of learning and just getting children ready to learn. So we need teachers who are willing, as I said, to improve their subject knowledge and to use that to support them, to move the children
to improve
forward.
things. And you mentioned there about vocabulary, and I know that's something that you've worked quite hard on since 2016 in the school. Can you give, maybe I'm sure there'll be other school leaders watching this, or teachers who, similar contexts or challenges or whatever, so what might be 1, 2, 3 different strategies or things that you might recommend that have worked for you in terms of developing that?
Certainly one of the things that has worked really well for us, I was very fortunate to go to attend a course by Doug Lamar in 2016, and the work from the book Reading Reconsidered, the vocabulary elements of that. I've never seen anything like that before. Really, really explicit teaching of vocabulary, clear pathways in terms of when you're delivering, what words you define, the onus on the teacher being the person who does the defining, what words you skip over, all of that. I was able to come back and train staff.
Yeah.
When I went to the Dublin Moth training, he actually introduced the book Bringing Words to Life, Isabel Beck.
Okay.
So that was in 2016. So
Yeah.
we've kind of been using her book to embed the teaching of vocabulary, and I think that's a real.
What's that book called?
It's called Bringing Words to Life.
Bringing Words to Life.
Isabel Beck.
Okay.
And that book, I think, is a great teacher manual for supporting the teaching of vocabulary. And I think all teachers should read it. If you haven't read it already, I would suggest you read that. I think there's been some other great books that have come into play for us. Alex Quigley's book. There's a new book out by Kelly Ashley, Word Power. So there's some really great books that are supportive of teachers, supportive of schools. We're also taught for writing school. Pike Corbett's developed that. If you're primary, you probably know more about that. But again, the way that teaches writing is there's a big onus on reading and vocabulary development. So I think bringing all of those into play has worked really well.
You mentioned, I know there'll probably be some primary teachers watching, and you mentioned that you yourself have a enjoyment from children's books and stuff. Is there one particular children's book in the last maybe 6 months that you would think was brilliant?
Oh my goodness!
If you had to pick one.
Ask me that. One book. There's never one book. There's so many. Gosh.
Okay, I'll let you name a couple then. Just one of your favourites. One of your favourites.
And this is a recommendation from Martin Galway, Small in the City.
Small in the City.
Sydney Smith. A
Okay.
great book. I'm not
Yeah.
going to tell anybody what it's about. You just need to get this.
Okay. Okay.
I'm also involved with an organisation called Empathy Lab, who do a day that supports schools to introduce empathy through children's literature.
Yeah.
So I was really privileged to be involved in choosing the long list, the short list, and I think it's the 24th, they're about to launch Empathy Day. And there's some great books that are involved in that, things like Ghost. I'm just turning around. I'm a big fan of Jason Reynolds' book, and he's got a series of books based on the characters that come from this story.
Yeah.
So there's so many. I could be here if you sidetrack me, I could be here for hours talking about children's books. But yeah, there's just such a great market for fiction, non-fiction, poetry. Teachers need to be readers. That's my big message. Teachers need to be readers, and readers need to be teachers. It's really important.
I know that's great. Moving on from there, because I know I've been looking at your Twitter feed and some of the things and trying to get a feel, I guess, for what you're passionate or interested in. One of the things I saw you share on your Twitter was about a book on unconscious bias in schools when it comes to race. How big an issue do you think this is, and how do you think it might show itself in schools?
I think it's a big issue in some schools. It's a difficult one because it's a conversation. When it comes to race, it's a conversation that people find difficult to have.
Yeah.
And often things get blurred, things get inflated, but I think as a society we need to acknowledge that race plays a part in education. Children have experiences in schools that are often based not just on the fact that they're not doing their work, they're not behaving in the right way, but also have links to the fact that the colour of their skin. And I know that as a black teacher, as a child who grew up in Birmingham, there were many experiences that we had. As I said, I've got 9 brothers and sisters. There were many experiences that we had that were linked to the colour of our skin. And they were very, very difficult to face, to deal with, very difficult for our parents.
This was when you were growing up in Birmingham,
yeah. And for in some areas, in some ways, it's changed, it's improved, it's better. But there are some aspects for children in education that are difficult because of their colour. I don't want to make it a big thing, but things like hairstyles. There is a discussion to be had around the way that, and I'm not talking about boys necessarily, particularly the way that black girls have their hair.
Yeah.
That is a style that is part of some children's culture heritage. And for schools to say, oh, you can't have your hair in braids, I think there's a conversation to be had with teachers, with head teachers, around their understanding of the way that black children's hair is styled. And I think that unconsciously that needs to be brought out, because people talk about, oh, it's a policy, it's about uniform, but there is a thing about culture and heritage and the way, as I said, the way that your hair as a black child is styled. We plait it, we braid it, we put extensions in, that's what black children do. So I think, a blanket ban and say that you can't have your hair in braids, I think there's a discussion to be had around things like that. And that's one thing. As I said, it's probably more of an issue in certain places, in certain schools, but...
Would you say that's conscious or unconscious?
I think it's unconscious for some people, because I think... But I think they need to be, it's about making yourself aware. If you've got black students, you've got to make yourself aware of what the culture and heritage will mean in terms of things like hair.
Yeah.
You've got to make yourself aware of that. So, conscious or unconscious, I think there needs to be some clarity in some schools. Some people need to really think and find out a little bit more. Rather than making statements about, oh, you can't do that because that's our policy. I think there's some discussions to be had.
What policy do you have here in that regard? I mean, is it?
We're very much, and maybe that's because I'm a black head. Hair's not an issue. We are very strict on uniform. I would say we're quite a strict school in terms of behaviour, because I know that if children are not behaving in a certain way, you cannot teach in that classroom.
Yeah.
And I need the teachers to be able to deliver. So I'm very much a hands-on head in terms of behaviour. If teachers are experiencing any particular things in the classroom, I'm very much about going in to support teachers, taking children out for a while, just having a little break, sending them back in, but being very much about, if you need to send them back out again, I'll take them for a while and then bring them back. So I would say we're quite strict. We're also very caring. We're very, we'll do whatever we need to do to make sure that things are calm for every child, that parents are happy, that children feel comfortable, that needs that come from outside of school are tackled. If children have issues at home, we make space for children to be able to talk about that to adults. Yeah. And all of those things have to work together for me in order for this school to work. This school works because we have to bring all of those things together. So I would say we're quite strict, but hair is not an issue. Gosh, there's sometimes when I've actually said to a child, they've had it out and had their hair out, and I said, just tell mum to braid that actually, so it looks neater. Yeah. Just got to make it neat and tidy rather than having it out. So, but it's not an issue. It's not an issue for me personally. And I think, as I said, I think people just need to do a bit more homework around culture, heritage, and...
Because I noticed you also shared I think the video by, you have to help me out.
Yeah. Just call Dr. Shoulder.
There you go, Dr. Shoulder's very well kind of received video,
Yeah.
where she said people are getting triggered by truth about racism or white privilege and can't handle the truth. So I was going to ask you, what do you think that truth is that she is referring to?
I think the truth is that one of the things I'm really conscious of now is the sense that people are getting fed up of talking about race. And I just think, gosh, that is a privilege for some people to be able to make that statement. If you've lived through experiences of being confronted with racism, it's not so easy to say, oh, I'm fed up of it. Actually, that's some people's lived experiences happening right now. And to say that you're exasperated with it, you're fed up of it, I find it quite difficult to take that on board. I also find it quite difficult to have to explain. And I think one of the things I really liked about what she said, what she did, was she articulated really well some ideas about people need to educate themselves. They've got to understand that it's all good and well saying, oh, race, this is a lovely country. It is a lovely country. It's a fantastic country. It's a country where if your parents have come from somewhere, they came here, they've settled here, they've had great opportunities here, their children have had great opportunities, but we've also faced a lot of issues.
Yeah.
I know my parents have faced a lot of issues around race, and that's our experience.
Yeah.
That is what we faced. It's because of the colour of our skin, and if you haven't got that colour, often you don't face those things. Those are not the things that you face. You might face other things, you might face other barriers, other inequalities, but you don't face it based on the colour of your skin. So that's an experience that we have that has to be acknowledged, because it's happening now, it happened in the past, and it's really distressing. It's really distressing.
Do you think things have, because obviously, hang on a minute, I'm just going to sort that out. You've mentioned this community, and I'm just wondering from your perspective, from you growing up, do you think things have got worse or better, or where does that sit, or is it just the same?
I think the thing about racism, there's a structural underpinning, and often what was in your face has now become embedded in institutions, and it's not so upfront all the time. It's not that person saying something to you. It's a bit more structural, and often that's harder to break, because if you're not part of the people making the decisions, it becomes a more difficult conversation to have. So I'm not necessarily saying that it's changed. It's just different. It's more structural.
Evolved.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Moving on from there, couple more questions. One is about the fact that you are now a research school.
Yes.
Now, that's exciting, because I think you launched it this week, is
Yes,
that right?
we did.
So what is that, for people who might not be aware? What is it that you do?
We are part of, I think it's 23 research schools across the country who work with the Education Endowment Fund, funded by the DFE, the Education Endowment Fund, to work with schools, educational institutions to close the gap, the educational gap across the country. The research schools, the Education Endowment Fund, have done about 200 trials of particular areas of education that have potentially got opportunities to make a difference in schools. So what they do is they research those thoroughly, bring researchers together to have discussions about impact, outcomes, where it would work, why it would work, what wouldn't work. And the Education Endowment Fund began to develop the toolkit, which is on their website, that gave schools some ideas about things that were probably schools' best bets in terms of research, and did financial implications as well as the months. Months. Out of that then came guidance documents around lots of different areas: behaviour, SEND, maths, English. And the research school's job is to disseminate those guidance documents and support schools to work on those particular best bets, but based on the context of their schools. So it's not a generic one-size-fits-all model. And it's not necessarily the answers, but it's about what is the research saying has the impact, and is your school's best bet. I think what it gives schools is an opportunity to just reflect on what they're doing currently, what is the research underpinning it or not, and actually giving schools that opportunity and that sense that just because we're doing something doesn't mean we have to keep doing it.
Yeah, of course.
We've got to look behind what we're doing.
Yeah.
Why are we doing it? Is there evidence that in our own context that it works? Maybe it works down the road, but does it work here? The research schools are also very clear. One of the new things that they're disseminating is guidance around implementation. Often schools take things on board, but actually they've not thought through whether or not the school's actually ready for that change, whether they've got the people in place to lead and drive that change. So it's very much about implementation, and I think that is the guidance document that kind of underpins all of the others. So our role is to disseminate, support, and hopefully close the gap. Help schools to close the gap. So it's very exciting. Very exciting.
Final question.
Yes.
So recently I saw a quote from you, which I quite liked, which was you were talking about educational leadership. What do we need to abandon before we start? First of all, what do you mean by that? And second of all, what would your answer to that be?
I think it kind of leads on from what I've said about what we do in our schools. Often you get caught up in layering on more, because it's the latest thing. And it gets to saturation point, and I think as schools, as leaders, we've got to be reflective. We've got to say, is this right for our school, for our context? And not be afraid to say, we're going to actually stop that. We might have invested money in it, we might have invested manpower in it, but actually it's not worked. And if we're going to bring something else in, often something good has to go. Dylan Williams very clear about that. Sometimes some good things have to go for something better to work.
Yeah, of course.
So I think as leaders, we need to be courageous in that way.
Do you think there's I've written a little bit about this before myself, is this kind of danger of leaders, particularly I guess higher up the chain, whether it be a deputy or a head teacher, feeling that they constantly need to be doing something to be effective. I need to introduce this new policy, these new policies. I can't be just sat. I have to micromanage, or I have to be seen to be doing something. And I personally, I kind of, I guess, I'm not saying, it's just an observation. It's something maybe I've observed or I've seen, or I think leaders maybe sometimes, certainly I've fallen into the trap of that as a middle leader, is doing that.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think you meet other people, or you hear about other things that schools are doing. You see other things.
You think you've got to play catch up.
And you think you've got to be doing it yourself. And I always say, you've just got to go back to your context. What does your school, you've got to know your school, you've got to know your children, you've got to know what your school needs in order for you to be really clear about what you accept and what you have to say, no, that's not for us. Other people may be doing it, but that's not for us. And that's often hard, but I think the more we do it, based on research, based on the evidence, I think we'll see some better outcomes. We'll see some better outcomes, and I think it will be better for the teachers. Because I think if you're evidence-informed practitioners, I think hopefully we'll see some better outcomes for the children.
Okay. Sonia, thank you very much.
Thank you.
That was Sonia Thompson. So this was episode 8. It will be available on YouTube in the next few days. Thank you
so much for tuning in to this episode of the Rebel Education podcast. You can follow the podcast on Podbean, iTunes, Spotify, and pretty much all other podcast providers. You can also tweet me at Rogers History on Twitter if you want to share any feedback on this podcast or any other podcast that you've listened to on the Rebel Education podcast. I will see you next Sunday. Cheers, everyone. Bye.